In a good play, every speech should be as fully flavoured as a nut or apple. And such speeches cannot be written by those who work among people who have their lips shut on poetry. In Ireland, for a few years more, we have a popular imagination that is fiery and magnificent and tender. So that those of us who wish to write start with a chance that's not given to those who live in places where the springtime of local life has been forgotten. Wrote Dublin playwright John Millington Synge in the preface to his play, The Playboy of the Western World. This is a sentiment I myself would hold dearly, but I really do believe it's been lost in our classrooms. In Irish schools, more often than not, a sense of Irishness is limited to the learning of the Irish language. That boils our national identity down to so little, and I really do believe that's a highly exclusionary and damaging thing to do. To gatekeep who is more or less Irish based off a knowledge of dialects is to say that's all we are. But I second Synge, in that we are magnificent and fiery and tender, and that our stories deserve to be studied. Whoever I am lies irrelevant for now, but this September I'll have started my final year of secondary school. And with that comes my dropping of the Irish language as a subject. I was always just one who was useless as Irish, being regularly shamed for not being a good patriot, as if I was spitting on Michael Collins' grave itself for not having a comprehensive knowledge of the all too intricate grammar structure. And I really did want to be good at learning Irish. I knew it was somehow sacred to my family, but the more I tried to learn, the more that weight it held just seemed to go silly and petty. Throughout my early years, I'd go home and write out the vocab with their translations, recite irregular verbs and prepositions, a gum at me, a gut at you, a kin at him, a key at her. But none of it did ever really stick. And I in no way had the facilities or the finances to even consider going to the Gaeltacht, to see the language in active practice. And I could learn all these minute nuances of the language structure, but I could not learn to love it. Especially when I found what was sacred to me in school. The English classroom and our school theatre stood like tiny places of worship, but they did not discriminate who was welcome there. They were in no way defined by their walls. The possibilities of who I could be and where I could go in there, it was all so wildly liberating. Until it wasn't. In fifth year, be it meth gangs in the Ozarks, the New England countryside, or a king in a fictional form of England whose fatal flaw was an alarming lack of comprehension skills, as a class we continuously rifled through plays and poems that all just seemed so out of touch. These were all someone else's story. Another and another and another day passed where I was made write and think about the American dream and the trials and tribulations of these men with far too much power. And it grew stale, and I really began to resent my holy place in school. The Verona heat certainly was the mad blood stirring. Every year on the English course for the college entry exam syllabus in Ireland, there are around 40 films, novels and plays that appear. And of that 40, there's an average of only 6 Irish writers that come up in that. That's an overwhelming minority, especially when you think of the stunning archives we have to pull from. And it's especially jarring when you think of the international acclaim of our writers. In Britain and in America, it's seen almost like a rite of passage for students to at some stage study either Salome or the importance of being earnest. But when at a workshop for this very talk, I had a flurry of notes from Irish teens asking me who exactly this Oscar Wilde character was. One that particularly tickled me is asking me why exactly it was important that we studied the writings of Dorian Gray. But I don't say that to shame this group of teens, or to patronise or anything at all. I really do have a deep admiration and respect for them. But I do find it troubling. And I'm sad for what they weren't taught. And I'm frustrated at the ideals that were grilled into their head. Our acclaim can be seen all across the globe, but yet we fail to see it in ourselves. Representation, especially in our classrooms, matters. It is the most powerful empowerment and educator, and it builds heaps of empathy. But if we don't make these references, we lose these references. And we have already lost so much to the British. Like plenty of other nations, grand factions of our culture has been lost to history. So we especially can't afford to lose this other rich and vibrant side of our culture. Generations of Irish bohemians have feared how this unconscious Americanization of our everyday has seeped into our consciousness and in more than one side of our educations. As impressionable preteens in SPHE or in sex ed class, we've all watched Juno or some other American coming-of-age film to learn the faults of uneducated or rather unchristian choices in life, and where a whole other conversation needs to happen there about inclusive and productive sex ed that doesn't demonise women for making the smallest mistake or dare showing a speck of sexuality. I am going to ask, why is it that the Ellen Page indie flick is the film to start this rather problematic conversation in the classroom? Why couldn't it have been an Irish film? Why couldn't we have watched The Snapper? Not only will it have the pro-life undertones that our educator will be satisfied with, but it'll also go about the topic in a far more relatable way, bringing up a dialogue of our drinking culture, the dynamics and concerns of a large working class family in Dublin of the time, while also pointing to Sharon's lack of education of her body, contraceptives and basic nutrition. It's a really underestimated tool in our educators' belts. It is having us think of these concepts from our own perspectives has us relating to them far easier, as well as furthering a sense of a national identity within ourselves. And it also brings up a dialogue of our own fatal flaws. As we are not an Isle of Kings, we do not have these inflated egos that lead to demise of kingdoms. But I really do believe we have a far too normalised, societally ingrained alcoholism that we're not ready to talk about. And even if we were, our articulation of our feelings is deplorable. Far too often, how yeah is responded to with a resounding how yeah, rather than addressing how we are. And even if the question is confronted, it's too often met with the sheepish, grand, or you know yourself. The snapper would unconsciously bring up this other aspect of ourselves as we see the power of when Jimmy does actively communicate with his daughter. A positive example I really do believe we could use more of. And over the past 9 months, I unintentionally found those positive examples, where the rest of my generation was tick-tocking or not. I read, and through my secret studies, I was indulged in the wit of Wilde. I was charmed and thrilled by the nuances of Beckett's Nothings. And like so many, I felt so understood and not judged by Sally Rooney. Actual, fearless, brilliant, intelligent Irish people I was confronted with in the first time in my education. But in order to have that opportunity, I had to neglect my Leaving Cert studies. They went to the same colleges as I hoped to attend. Some even lived within the 5-kilometre radius of my house. And they dealt with the meanings of life as well as their mental health in ways I saw it myself. Normal people was a lot more than gas shorts, sex and silver chains to people of younger generations. As for the first time, we were told that it was worth being Irish by the mainstream, that it was exciting and interesting and maybe even sexy. And I really did gain so much from my researching in lockdown. A decent heap of self-esteem and sense of identity came with the reading. But I don't want to have to, and I should not have to, refer to that time as some sort of annus mirabilis. That shouldn't have been a discovery I had to make by myself. I should have been taught about these people in school and been excited about my future as an Irish person in school, in my everyday. And in our everyday, we must continue to fight for our Queen Maeve. So, how do we do that? Where do we go from here? We have an immense issue on how our culture is handled, or rather neglected in our classrooms. But even if I had all the answers, if I've learned anything over the past 9 months was to in no way trust a coalition education minister to care about my feelings, emotions or thoughts as a student, let alone the education department. And even if I was to stand here and insist change, demand for us to decolonise our curriculum, I don't know how I'm supposed to do that with a clear conscience. How can this even begin to seem important when it's all it is, at the end of the day, a book list in the middle of an exam system that is crying out for reform? As a country, we hold the statistic of having the highest suicide rate among the Leaving Cert demographic. We have a deeply problematic issue with how our point scores are correlated to class structures, and a drinking as well as a rape culture paired with it all that I don't think any education ambassador is ready or willing to address. How could I stand here and urge for us all to fight for Queen Maeve when our own students aren't even being fought for? All I can say is that, students, think of what you're reading and why you're reading it, with more than just, it's on my leave and it's the mentality. Question the novels that your teachers pick. Question the texts that you're told you just should know. And if you don't like the answers that you get, I urge you to take on a different text that makes you feel empowered in your identity and in your Irishness. And it's not impossible. It's not a hard thing to do. Be not afeared. The Sahel is full of noises, sounds, and sweet airs. But if we lose these noises, if we lose these stories and our spirit and our magnificent, fiery tenderness, our colonisers will have succeeded. We'll lose who we are altogether. But regardless of what I have to say here, regardless of the fact that I'm spending so many extra hours into teaching myself Irish texts and Irish posts to talk about my English paper, I'll still not be regarded as a good Irish person. Not in school. I'll still not be regarded as the Colleen Jas or the lovely girl or even a possible heir to Queen Maeve, as the Irish language was just never my strong suit. I will remain, however, the wife who smashes television and gets jail. Thank you.